You're listening to a bonus episode of the Naked More Red podcast by Libolibo Studio. I'm Ilya Kolmanovsky. This show is about scientific discoveries and people behind them. I often interview eminent scientists for the podcast, but only some parts of these conversations make it into the main episodes. Here, you can listen to the interviews in their original language. Please tap to rate and comment on us on Apple Podcasts. It's very important to us that people find out about this podcast. Can you imagine having a conversation with a humpback whale? A group of scientists conducted an experiment in which they played back recorded calls and received responses from Twain, a female humpback whale in southeast Alaska. It tells us a lot about how we can detect and explore intelligence in non-human species. I spoke to two of the authors of a paper describing this case about what a playback experiment is, how it was conducted, and how observing humpback whales might help us to continue the search for extraterrestrial intelligence.
Yeah, my name is Dr. Fred Sharpe. I am an evolutionary biologist. I study animal behavior. I currently have an appointment with the McCowan Lab at UC Davis. Here is California, UC Davis. I'm also an affiliate with the SETI Institute in California. And I also work with the Alaska Whale Foundation as one of their primary whale disentanglers.
Amazing. Could you tell us more about this playback experiment? There was a paper recently published. I'm very interested specifically in that one.
You bet. We work in an area of Southeast Alaska where there's lots of humpback whales now. They're recovered in this area. And we have the opportunity to get out there and work with them as part of our long-term studies. Humpback whales are extremely complex vocalists, and we know very little about the actual meaning and function of a lot of the sounds that they make. One of the ways to understand these animals is to observe their behaviors in the wild and note the behavioral context that vocal behavior is occurring, develop some predictions, hypotheses about what the function of these sounds might be, such as come hither or go away or submit or let's play or go over here, I found something to eat. So you look at the behavioral context, make predictions about its function, and then by playing back sounds of the animal, their own sounds to them, to see if they behave in a manner that is consistent with what you observe in their natural use of the sounds. And that way you can start to infer some meaning of these sounds. And this particular study, we're operating on a couple of week playback trials out in Southeast Alaska. And one of the sounds that we like to play back, one of our primary go-to sounds, is called a throp or a wop call. It's a very basic part of their social chatter. Humpbacks give songs, social chatter, and feeding calls. And these are part of their more social chatter, which has more conversational type qualities relative to the more melodic songs that the males give. So one of the more common of these calls is called wop or the throp. So those are selected because they tend to overlap. One of our colleagues, Michelle Fournet, in some of her work, she's shown that these sounds overlap with shipping noise, so they're good targets for conservation. Work done by Chris Gabriel and Lauren Wild in Southeast Alaska has looked at these wop calls and noted that they tend to occur across behavioral contexts, day and night, kind of a consistent low background level, suggesting they may serve as some sort of important, contact call. I'm over here, you're over there, what are you doing? It's like, so you know where I am. And so it's a basic part of their repertoire, and so a good target for understanding and study how it's used and how we may hopefully prevent, humans masking those important sounds with our noise and help us monitor and change human behavior ultimately. And so the wop and the throp calls, Gabriel and Wild in their previous study, they showed that they were given a regular basis in Southeast Alaska. One thing they noticed, though, that the calls, as the background density of individuals changed, the rate of calling did not, suggesting that the animals were at lower densities, they started to call more frequently, suggesting, again, it might be utilized as a contact call. So we were doing these playbacks, and we're always looking for important, good exemplars, good high-quality sounds to play back to these animals. We recorded this beautiful sound one day when we were at sea, and it was one of these throp calls, and we used it in the experiment the following day. And that got this very interesting response from Twain. This individual who was feeding in the vicinity just happened to be as part of our protocol. We do 20 minutes of listening, establish baselines, 20 minutes of the playback, 20 minutes of post monitoring. And right about the time we were ready to do after the monitoring period, Twain was feeding, came foraging nearby, turned the speaker on and started playing back. And the individual remained in the area for the 20 minutes. And that's when we engaged in this 36, each party called 36 times back and forth with temporal matching. And some wouldn't call it conversation per se, but it did allow for the individuals to change how frequently we responded to each other and sort of match the temporal latency between calls. And so that suggested some level of adjustment and accommodation. It also showed interest on Twain's part, which was very interesting. And it let us know that what was really cool was after we turned the speaker off as part of our protocols, the animal continued to call as it left the area. So, hey, where'd you guys go? I got to go feed, but nice knowing you. And so it's kind of like, so it gained some level of interest. So this is on the road to what's called a dynamic playback, where you're instead of just using your typical playback studies with marine mammals and terrestrial animals, they're just used just as a general way to understand the animal's call behavior. You develop a full lexicon for the species, and then again you look at the baseline behaviors, the context they occur. You make predictions about functions. You do the playback, but these are often typical playback studies are very sort of randomized and predetermined. They can definitely help you infer some level of meaning, but it does not allow for a more elaborate conversation to evolve. And that's the cool thing about these dynamic playbacks is that it, of course, you need to do all the basic in terms of use of appropriate controls and replication and reproducibility. But here's where you start to have more of a conversation and of some level of coordination. And sometimes the most important aspects of a communication system, both in humans and non-human animals, requires when it's being dynamically used in a type of conversation, coordination, turn-taking, accommodation, synchrony, tells you about the flexibility of the species. It allows for mirroring, kind of one of the standard things that is used. It's like you want to interact with somebody, you mirror what they're doing with innovation, see if they mirror back, matching your innovation, but then one up you. So it's a ways for looking at their sensory discrimination, their level of interest. And these are important studies because ideally they're minimally invasive. Animals are interacting out of interest. The animals are volitional. Ideally, it would allow for repeated interactions where you could start to get into things like playful interactions, some mutual level of trust, even gift giving that we see in some animals. They give gifts like leopard seals to underwater photographers. Allows the evolution for almost like a trade language or novel symbols to be used, sort of in the manner that African honey guides and their tribes people have developed unique signals that are atypical for each of their own, the honey guide and the tribes people's lexicon. So they're actually developing new symbols, new symbols. And it's really exciting doing dynamic playbacks because it allows for plumbing latent capacities of an animal that aren't evident in their within species or conspecific interactions. Like I like to think it about as humans as Cro-Magnons. 100,000 years ago, we were supposedly completely physiologically, mentally developed, but we just hadn't gotten into modernity, saying pensive tool use, art, music, technology. But we had that capacity. And so by doing these interspecies experiments, we hope to learn a little bit more about the deep latent capacities of the humpback whale.
Amazing, fascinating. I would love to ask you more in detail about that experiment, but would you allow me to switch to Laurance now? Because I would very much like to get his impact.
I'm a principal investigator at the SETI Institute, and I've been there for almost 4 decades since the SETI Institute started. And my main field have been detection of extrasolar planets, and in particular circumbinary planets that go around 2 stars at once. And the other one is basically the application of information theory to non-human signals with the idea of developing intelligence filters for the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And I might add, we are saying there are various different kinds of intelligence, but the one we will detect is communication intelligence. And the kind, we're using information theory as a proxy to measure rule complexity within an information carrying system. So we are using information theory to well-developed mathematics for computers and so on. And we're using it to examine what is the complexity of the rules within the message that we just got.
And what's your impression from the whales then, specifically from this experiment? Tell us more about it.
Well, this experiment is a little bit difficult to apply information theory because we're saying hello, 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 hi, hi, howdy, howdy. So we were a bit, Twain was matching the timing, but that's the only word we knew in humpback. So the conversation was a bit limited. If we had multiple signals, I could have applied information theory, and we hope to do that next time. What we can do from the compendium of, signals that Fred's been in the field, for example, for more than 3 decades. And what we can do is compute all the conditional probabilities between the signals so that when the next encounter occurs, we can complete the sentence by having the computer calculate, okay, you're in a condition now where the probability that the next signal is signal like 200 is 98.3%. Okay, play it. And we can then start completing conversations in humpback.
A bit like ChatGPT, no?
Yeah.
That's quite remarkable.
We have had Fred's first author on the next paper, and that will be humpback whales are making bubble rings. And it looks to us, at least, like the humpback whale is inviting us to play, or in some way creating a non-audio signal to say hello. It's a ring of bubbles. And then we have a third paper I'm working on, and it is an attempt, we believe, by a humpback whale to vocalize within the human range of hearing in human tempo. So it sounds like people talking underwater. And it's remarkable. It's time the world heard this. So that's an attempt of a humpback whale, maybe, to at least follow what humans sound like. So we believe, it may be like learning a language, suddenly it clicked. And if we could suddenly click, like we did with Twain, with humpback whales in general, I think it would be a breakthrough, not just for SETI to broaden its search, but it would be a breakthrough for our respect and kind of where we fit in. SETI is of interest to everybody I know of. Everybody has an opinion about extraterrestrials because we want to know where we fit in. And in some sense, it seems like humans used to fit in better, but indigenous people seem to get it. But we're looking for a modern version of where we fit in again. We want to be in harmony with the environment and with other species on this planet. And I don't think you can guilt people into taking care of Earth, and you can't scare them into it, but you can love them into it. And if people love and respect, for example, humpback whales, they'll go, okay, we have to take care of this. We have to show more respect. So hopefully that's the heart of what we're doing. The head is information theory, but the heart is let's get along and see where we fit back in.
Amazing. But could you kind of wrap it up and tell us how that knowledge that you're gaining from interacting with whales prepares you to continue your search for extraterrestrial intelligence?
Well, it one aspect is that it makes intelligence kind of a universal. And another is that, the universe is very big. The galaxy is huge. And we can only detect leakage like early television less than 10 light years away. So what we need is the extraterrestrials to be pointing at us. We could, like with an Arecibo type telescope, you can communicate across the galaxy, but you have to be pointed to each other. And a big question of SETI has been, are they going to want to point to us? And the humpback whale Twain clearly said intelligence and curiosity go together. Twain is not being fed. There's no reward. Twain is doing it out of curiosity. And that's been tremendously encouraging to the SETI searches.
Fascinating, really. May I ask you to go back to specifics of that experiment that day, really? Were you on the boat on that day?
Yes, we were. We were about...
Oh, both of you?
No, Lawrence was remote.
Which part of the boat were you at? Because I know there were two teams working.
Yeah, there was two teams. We had the playback team. That was Brenda and Jim Crutchfield were down below doing playbacks. Then we had another team up on top who was blind to the timing of the playbacks. They were just there to record behavior, and they didn't know. Did our best to keep them unaware.
I would call them deaf, by the way, not blind.
Right.
Because they were observing.
And my role was more of a facilitator, maintaining communication with the captain of the vessel, maintaining any communication with other boats in the vicinity that we wanted to communicate what our objectives were out there on the water. And so it was pretty exciting to the moment when it was like we were doing these playbacks and somebody's like, the sound is coming back over the speaker and you're not pressing the buttons. Well, that was Brenda's role. So that was really exciting to, because we've done quite a few playbacks now of these whoop calls, and often we don't get our one of our associates in previous studies, Michelle Fournay, she had some measure of success in getting some animals she believes to call back to her. But again, if it's not done in an adaptive framework, that just is kind of a one-off, right? And because it was the stimulus was randomized and predetermined, and it's a really important foundation way to build a study. But eventually, as I think we are now, we have enough insight into whoops that playbacks and more dynamic playbacks are starting to prove fruitful.
So here's a big question. I looked up some literature, and it seems to me that playback experiments in general date back to decades ago. But to the best of my knowledge, this was pretty much the first real turn-taking. Why? I mean, why did it happen on that day? What caused that success?
Part of it is because it's been the objective of previous studies. In addition to basic playback studies that are done to infer meaning in sort of more randomized, predetermined manner, those are really important to gain insight into meaning and function. But in the studies of marine mammals, what's been used a lot is what are called controlled exposure experiments. And these are usually done specifically for asking specific wildlife questions, conservation questions about the effects of anthropogenic noise, say, for example, shipping noise in an area, or sonar, or seismic exploration, sounds on specific populations and habitats. You want to establish their relationship to, as you gradually turn up the volume of those sounds, when does the animal exhibit a behavioral response? So you can get some idea of the sensitivity of these animals to these sounds. And here in these experiments, which have Peter Tyek and his colleagues have been promoting these and articulating their importance. And these sounds that you play back are typically not part of the animal's signal repertoire. They're just more electronic sounds, and they're ideally sounds that have an unambiguous behavioral response in the animal. So you turn up the volume, and when the moment they detect it, you see a behavioral change in the animal. Now you have some idea of the volume of your sound when we measure it of sound pressure level underwater, and the abilities of animals to detect that. And these are kind of a titration experiment where you're gradually turning up the frequency, the sound volume or shifting frequency. And so again, these don't have they're very important studies for establishing these conservation measures and mitigations, but they're not designed to have a carry on conversation. So a lot of these
you were the first. Were you the first to try? Simply put,
certainly, Michelle. I would say let's put it this way: dynamic interactions have been underutilized in the field.
Okay,
I've said.
Okay,
but to our knowledge, I think this was this was an important study, and it established the first conversational interaction with the humpback whale in a data-taking environment, and established this synchronous matching with the individual. So we feel like it was a pretty important first step, and we look forward to more interaction in this manner.
Fantastic. When is your next paper coming out, especially at least as a preprint?
Our next paper coming out, we hope to have it out in the fall. This is the one on the bubble rings, where this is fall cool because the humpbacks are. We didn't witness any of these, but we solicited from our friends and colleagues and citizen scientists, and have like a dozen observations now of humpback whales coming up and blowing these beautiful meters across giant bubble rings in the presence of admiring human observers, and we hope to have that coming out this fall.
Fantastic. Good luck with that. We'll be definitely waiting and looking forward to it. What role would artificial intelligence play to enhance our ability to carry out those studies? Engage.
But as you know, AI is the name for everything nowadays. But pattern recognition already plays a role in identifying tail flukes through a group called Happy Whale. And so people take pictures, they can send them to Happy Whale and have it identified. That's how we could identify Twain right away. But for us, there's no magic in artificial intelligence. We have to know how the signals were classified, because you need to have consistent classification of signals, or humpback phonemes, so to speak. And so artificial intelligence would be, or what they're calling artificial intelligence, is pattern recognition, would be really good in being able to classify signal, maybe on contour or whatever. Brenda, our other colleague, Brenda McCowan at UC Davis, she demonstrated that contour is important to bottlenose dolphins. You can say howdy or howdy, and it's the contour that makes the meaning. Or howdy, you can do a high frequency, so on.
Is it published?
Yes.
Did she use any sort of machine learning to show that?
She used k-means cluster analysis, and of course, the mathematics were automated to some extent, but I wouldn't call it machine learning because it wasn't a neural net or anything. Those weren't around when she did her dissertation at Harvard. This is 1995. But we're going to utilize a lot of machine things that machines can do well: pattern recognition, cross correlation, and the information theoretic measures themselves. Because, if you have a simple critter, you can say, okay, like say squirrel monkeys have an alarm call for snake and an alarm call for eagle. And if you mistake them and you get out on the limb to avoid the snake, the eagle's going to pick you off. So this one-to-one correlation with actions is fine if it's a simple signaling system. But humpback whales have a lot of different sounds. They make sounds that all sorts of other critters make. You could hear a humpback whale sound and say, well, that's a crow. No, that's a monkey. No, that's a person, a human. And so they have tremendous number of signal types. And so consequently, when you go to look for combinatorics of it, signal 1 followed by a signal 13, or signal 5 followed by a signal, 27, and all the possible combinations, you can see where it has to be automated in order to then get a string of a whole bunch of things. And then the computer says, okay, you've got a 98.7% probability that a whistle, that a signal 157 is next. Okay, play it. And we play it, and the humpback whale goes, that isn't Polly wants a cracker. They just finished my sentence.
That's fascinating. Yeah, there's one tiny detail. I think what I got from the paper is that Brenda was matching her latency, her timing, to Twain's. But you said something different, Fred. You said it's like Twain was matching her latencies to you. What really was going on there?
Well, it was both, actually. Once you're in this step now, sync, right? If someone starts to change more than the other, the question is how much does the other one match that? So I think that's actually a really good question. And we might actually be able to take some additional measures there to see once a duty cycle was established, who was more likely, who deviated from that protocol more often.
Can you unwrap this for me a little bit? Can you make an example of you and Twain chatting?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it'd be like, so we started the calls, and I think we called several times before Twain responded, right? And we'd already determined, our work and previous work indicates that these swap calls are used at very low levels in the background environment. Sometimes they'll go in kind of a duty cycle, like once every 60 seconds, or Twain at the end of the experiment went back to, what was it, 41 second? As it was leaving, it was 41-second intervals. So it's very repeated and regular, and almost like an airline transponder or something. And so by having the animals cinch down to a much more tighter frequency, tighter, we would. So the matching is like we vocalize and we play black, and then Twain waits a certain amount of time and calls back, like say 10 seconds, and then we go back 10 seconds. And then wait another 10 seconds. And so there was a period there where we came quite in tight sync, right? But then gradually started to drift off to it. You could also see Twain's behavior changing a little bit. Initially, it was kind of like the animal almost got like what was that? It just sort of like shrunk down in the water, and its spout was very, very subtle. And then partway through, it got a bit more like just a little bit more the wheezed blow, kind of a little bit more. We associate that with becoming more excited and more engaged, and a greater level of arousal. And then towards the end, things started to drift off. The animal was surfacing at greater distances from the vessel, appeared to be gradually leaving. We shut the speaker off for 20 minutes. As Twain departed, it went back to its 41 second, where it developed at 41 second for several calls. And so kind of going back to its normal duty cycle. So I would say that the matching, as in a conversation, it was mutual.
But how did you drag her into increasing that tempo? I mean, originally it was slow, but how did you arrive to that?
That is a good question. And we could go back and look at the specifics of how the temporality. And Brenda, she had her hand on the playback button. She could be a good one too. But I think simply it was just, we just had an increasing frequency of the output that the animal came in and was responding to. It came off of its longer duration vocal patterns.
Yeah, Brenda was the one that started. She only had one signal type that we knew what we thought the meaning was. And so she started the temporal variation to make sure we were having a conversation instead of just echoing or parroting. And so I think that's why she did the temporal variation. And in the paper, we do an analysis that basically says, this is far, far from random. It was something in the 90s percentile that this was non-random, and it wasn't an accident that Twain was tracking Brenda's temporal variations and vice versa.
Yeah, an animal can be calling at a certain rate every 20 seconds, and then you can call every 20 seconds too, and it may look like you're having a conversation, but the animal is just doing what it naturally does out there, right? And it was by varying the call and seeing change, Twain's response to that was an important part of us being able to say it was non-random.
Brenda said she has never had an experience like that before. It was unique to interact with an animal, especially she's worked with monkeys and with elephants, but when there's no reward, then that just shows Twain was interested. And, humpback whales weigh 40, 50 tons. They do what they want. If you've got an interaction with a humpback whale, you can bet the whale was interested. It had nothing to do with reward. There were no fish around. They didn't just happen to be in the area. This was what's that? Interesting. And to stick around for so long. We were the ones with the permit said 20 minutes you can play back. So we truncated the experiment because there are permit limitations, not because Twain lost interest.
That's sad. Well, thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time. And I really appreciate that. Amazing story. Good luck with the continuation of your experiments.
Okay. Very good. Very good.
This was a bonus episode of the Naked Mole Rat podcast by Libolibo Studio. I'm Ilya Kolmanovsky. Goodbye.